Actually, I was just looking at that slide Martin put up with the NERDC acknowledgement down the bottom, and I think that's when I met Martin in 1983. He was doing some work that was funded by NERDC, which was the then equivalent of what ARENA is now, except it did all energy, not just renewables. And I was on the technical standing committee that reviewed Martin's project, and thankfully we thought it was good work and funded it. So I just saw the acknowledgement of NERDC. Yeah, so I thought I'd look at what's happening next. We're hearing so much about storage in every single day in any of the energy newsletters. You hear about storage, and we've sort of been hearing about it the way we have been hearing about electric vehicles for probably a decade, and kind of waiting to see what's going to happen and see if it's going to happen. And I thought I'd just have a little look at the market and what we should be thinking about and what the issues are. But I'll just start very briefly with this slide, which you've all seen me give for the last 20 years. And you know, when I first started doing it, of course, it was down here from 1995 to 2005, and it was all the off-grid market that we were talking about. And now, in the last decade, it's really taken off with the green bit, which is the small-scale grid-connected PV market. And Australia now has about 4.5 gigawatts of PV installed, so it's been a phenomenal growth. And the prices in Australia which is the red line in dollars per watt, have really gone down rapidly. And the size of the small scale systems in the green block from the previous slide, the sizes have gone up. You might remember the earlier grants were sort of for 1 kilowatt systems, and everyone was putting in 1 kilowatt systems. Then we had RECs, which gave you 1.5 kilowatt systems, and then now people are putting in typically over 4 kilowatt systems. So the size of the market's gone up, the prices have gone down, and we've actually got the most competitive prices in the world as a result of some of the things that we did here, including standardizing the grid connection agreements. In the US, they're still fighting about those sorts of issues, and we got in really early when we saw this market developing and put the processes in place. And it's worked really well for us. So that's the backdrop as to what's happened with PV, and now we have to say, okay, how does storage fit into this? What are the prospects? What can we think about? We already know that PV is cost effective against most retail tariffs in Australia, with flat tariffs of 20 to 30 cents, and in Sydney, the time of use tariff, the peak rate's over 50 cents. So PV is definitely cost effective here against those tariffs. And we have the New South Wales feed-in tariff customers who are on 60 cents are going to come off that next year. And most of them are only going to be offered sort of 0 or, if they're lucky, 4 cents for any exported electricity. So they're very interested in storage. And there's 160,000 of those households about this time next year are going to be really looking around. In other states, they had fits which weren't as generous, but they go for longer, so those customers aren't going to be necessarily looking around for another 10 years, but maybe they will when they see what happens here. We're currently installing about 12,000 systems a month, and if most of these new systems are over 4 kilowatts, you can imagine that well over 50% of what they're generating is being exported. So whereas customers who were originally putting in 1 and 1.5 kilowatt systems weren't that interested in whether they exported or not because they were using it, now they're definitely interested in what they get for their exported power. And so this is where the interest in storage really comes in. Some of the commercial offerings at the moment, and I must say there's more hype than reality in what's available in the market. There's a lot of odds and ends, but some of the systems that are available seem to be something like $10,000 for a 4 kilowatt system with 7 kilowatt hours of storage. And in the Sydney climate, that gives you about 30 cents kilowatt hour. So, you know, it's getting there. It's almost there, and for some customers it will be enough for them to be interested in it. So let's look then at what that means for the market. But there isn't just one market for storage, and there isn't just one technology, and you need to start to think about what do you want to do with storage, which market do you want to target, and which technology are you going to use to target that market. And there's different combinations of those things out there now, and there's a whole range of different batteries. So it's not a sort of generic, you know, we've had PV modules and you just use them for everything. It's not going to be quite the same. So this is a study that CSIRO did recently, and it tried to separate out the different technologies by market and where you might use them. And it's sort of saying the flow batteries, the bromine batteries and the vanadium batteries, and the lithium iron phosphate technology are more suited to this bulk energy storage market that the utilities might use at a substation, for instance. Whereas other lithium ion, advanced lead acid, you know, the lead acid which has the sort of capacitor on the top of it, might be more suited to regulation or here to power quality. So the regulation market is when the utilities are trying to meet their N-1, N-2 criteria and need to have capacity in place to be able to meet that as they get closer to the edge of that. Network augmentation and deferral is what the utilities again are interested in when their load is getting close to the capacity of their lines. So then you know, they might use advanced lead acid again and lithium iron phosphate batteries. And then down here, if you're trying to compensate for, say, the PV power fluctuating and other fast response requirements, you might use lithium ion again and advanced lead acid with the capacitor built in. So, you know, it depends what you want to do and how you use the battery. So the current market's very small. The Australian Energy Market Operator is saying that there's about 500 residential systems installed. Look, you get different numbers depending on who in the industry you talk to. And that compares to, you know, 1.5 million PV customers. So very small comparative size. They're also saying there's about half a gigawatt of large capacity storage. Now I'm assuming this is the trial systems that the utilities are putting in, because I don't really know what else that's referring to. There's about 3 to 4 megawatts installed off-grid. We know that off-grid market's been there for 40 years. The Climate Council is sort of projecting that in the long term, half of Australia's households will have storage. I think it's probably going to be maybe higher than that, but let's see. And they're saying the market potential is 24 billion if that happens. Globally, they're expecting the market to grow 10 times over the next 5 years, and costs have been falling quite rapidly. Not as quickly as PV costs fell, but you know, pretty good. So the market projections that AEMO has put together recently, I'm not sure how well you can see those numbers, but this is the forecast installed capacity in megawatt hours for batteries that they're projecting that from now on residential PV systems will include a battery, a certain percentage of them, and they've modelled different sizes and take-up rates, but their market size projection here does not include existing PV customers who might retrofit batteries. So I've added this little blue column on the end to include that, because I suspect that in fact that will be a very good market. So the AEMO projection is about, say, 8 gigawatt hours of batteries installed by 2034, and if you add the existing PV customers, that goes to 12 gigawatt hours. They're saying they'll have 33 gigawatts by 2034 as their high scenario. Now looking, Green Tech Media is saying we'll have 44 megawatts by 2016. So there's lots of different projections of market size. AEMO's modelling is saying 40% of homes will have storage and 20% of homes will also have EVs by that time. So we'll see. Again, they're all predicting fairly big markets over the long term. The link to EV is, it's potentially strong, but it's not necessarily automatic. There's only about 2,000 EVs in Australia at present, and we've all been waiting for EVs, haven't we? But they're still so expensive. Unless you can afford a Tesla, you really they're not for us at the moment. But the forecast is in 10 years there'll be 165,000, so going up from 2,165. And if you look at the electricity demand, it will grow by about 0.2%. So the utilities are waiting for EVs, thinking this will solve the problem they've had because PV's killed their market. But it's not really going to solve their problem if that's the sort of impact it's going to have. But it's going to be an impact. The costs are expected to be about $200 per kilowatt hour by 2020, but they really need to be less than that to be cost competitive with conventional cars. So the costs of not only the batteries but the whole package that you get really has to come down in price quite a bit. And while we hear about maybe using your EV as your mobile storage in your home and plugging it in and coming home, the type of battery, as I explained before, that you might use for electric vehicles may not be the battery that you want to use for your household power system, and you may wreck the battery by using it for fast discharge and vice versa. So you're really going to have to look at the battery, whether you can use it for an electric vehicle application and still use it for a home energy application, and whether the type of battery you've got is going to let you do that. Okay, so the electricity sector is obviously reeling from the impact of PV and now starting to think about what's going to happen with storage. Now, PV, they didn't get in time to kill it, and they're trying, of course, retrospectively, but with storage they're trying to get in early, and they've already, for instance, restricted, most utilities now won't let you export from a battery, which is, it's the worst thing for them, really. They should be encouraging that, but their immediate response is, let's try and stop this because, PV we didn't stop, and look what's happened. So these are the forecast demand reductions that AEMO is projecting because of the storage uptake that I showed before. So it's sort of saying 2.4% in New South Wales, 6% in Victoria, and so on. And this is assuming no export from the batteries. And of course, this doesn't include existing households putting in storage, so it could be 35 to 40% more. Now, 6% demand reduction and potentially 40% more than that is quite a significant demand reduction to add to the demand reductions they've already seen from PV. So the impact on the market really depends on who owns the storage, what they're using it for, what the tariff structures that come into play do, when the feed-in tariffs for solar end, what your solar resource is, and therefore how much you can, a whole lot of things, how you load works out. All the AEMO estimates are based on current load patterns and assuming that people won't change their behaviour once they have a PV and a storage system. Now, probably they will change their behaviour. And so these projections of what will happen are really very loose, because if they don't know how to think about what behaviour change they're going to see. Now we can look at it and you know, model what's going to happen for customers, and some of my earlier slides with Sashir Goel's work, if you remember, you know, you can easily see what customers might do, but at this stage AEMO is saying, well, we don't know what customers are going to do, so we're not going to include anything there. Of course, the networks are moving to high fixed charges, particularly high fixed daily rates, anything that locks the customer into a payment that they can't get out of no matter what they do with PV storage, anything like that. Now, that's of course playing against them, because customers are hating their utilities every day even more, and so when batteries are available they're going to jump at them because they're feeling so much like the utilities are out to get them when they try to reduce their, you do all the energy efficiency things, you put in solar and so on, and your bill still goes up because the utilities are hitting you with fixed charges you can't escape. So the regulatory framework for storage obviously needs to be looked at really carefully. We need to ditch the NEM really, the National Electricity Market. We need to start again and design a new market. And one of the things we need to do is change the way networks are regulated. In fact, probably this whole idea of natural monopolies and regulated return on assets has been, you know, we've got gold-plated networks, which we don't want. What we wanted was smart networks, right? We didn't get smart networks. And now we're going to have to pay again to get the smart networks, otherwise we can't do all these nice things. But you know, networks can add storage, we can add storage. Who gets the benefits? We need to have a regulatory framework so that those benefits are equitably distributed. Should networks own storage, or should it be a ring-fenced business that they can't use their market power to run storage? But you know, we have ring fencing now for all sorts of things. It only kind of works. As I said, most networks are saying you can't export. Depends on also where you want to put storage, will depend on what type of grid. Australia is a different system to, say, Europe, where it's got a big population density and grids, you know, that I guess the idea of strengthening the grid to increase renewable penetration has been their approach, whereas for us, with long grid lines connecting small population bases, the options for us are different, and I think we need to think differently about how we use storage and what the opportunities are for us in this market. Because we've got something like 5% of the load in New South Wales using 70% of the network. You know, that's not a good use of network, which is costing us an arm and a leg. We need to rethink how we do this. And so how you would use storage in a skinny grid, the priority might be in time of use arbitrage to balance, you know, individual customer loads and so on, power quality issues. If you're using storage in, say, the centre of Sydney, you're looking at energy shifting and another market and much more the whole big interconnected grid. Then we've started to talk about what if we disconnect customers, what if we disconnect whole towns and have mini grids. Obviously storage is a really critical component in allowing us to do these sorts of things, and a lot of these are already playing out. The Hunter Valley is developing a little community which is not even going to connect to the grid from day one. We've got suburban Adelaide doing the same thing. We've got lots of these things starting to pop up, and storage is the key. They can't do it without. So we're going to have a lot of really interesting stuff, but we haven't got any framework, nothing in the rules about how you disconnect a customer, what the rules are about supplying customers who were on the grid with something that's now not on the grid. And the utilities are really struggling to come to agreement on how to treat customers like this, and how to approach it, and what services to offer. Can they offer a grid equivalent service or not? And how does the private generation play? You know, if a customer already has a PV system on the roof, you disconnect them and supply them with a wrap system. How does that all interact? Who owns what? There's a lot of really interesting questions, and I think we'll all enjoy the next exciting ride.